that all men are created equal.
Black Man Thinkin.
Freedom is never more than one generation away from extinction. We didn't pass it on to our children in the bloodstream. The only way they can inherit the freedom we have known is if we fight for it, protect it, defend it, and then hand it to them with the well-taught lessons of how they in their lifetime must do the same.
Black Man Thinkin.
Anytime you throw your weight behind a political party that controls 2/3 of the government, and that party can't keep the promise that it made to you during election time, and you are dumb enough to walk around continuing to identify yourself with that party, you're not only a chump, but you're a traitor to your race.
Black Man Thinkin.
If we lose freedom here, there's no place to escape to. This is the last stand on earth. And this idea that government is beholden to the people, that it has no other source of power except the sovereign people, is still the newest and the most unique idea in all the long history of man's relation to man. Whether we believe in our capacity for self-government or whether we abandon the American Revolution and confess that a little intellectual elite in a far distant capital can plan our lives for us better than we can plan them ourselves.
Black Man Thinkin.
In this present crisis, government is not the solution to our problem. Government is the problem.
Black Man Thinkin.
Stanley Levy, Black Man Thinkin, here on the dominant force in Internet conservatism, TalkAmericaRadio.us. Also, WDDQ, Talk 92.1 FM in Valdosta, Georgia, WJHC, Talk 107.5 North Florida Talk Radio, FreedomInAmericaRadio.com, and WLBB, News Talk AM 1330 and FM 106.3 in Carrollton, Georgia. Happy to be with you again. Every so often, I feel it is necessary to trot out the good news story that we have had ever since the end of the dark period of Obama. People look at me and say, I don't understand what you mean. Well, it kind of goes like this.
Stay focused. Talk about things that matter to people. It's the economy, stupid.
Yes, the economy, the U.S. economy, ever since Barack Obama has been gone. We have had ups and downs, really more ups and downs, and then there is what happened in the first quarter of 2019.
The U.S. economy grew at a faster rate than expected in the first quarter of the year. The Commerce Department released preliminary data for that period on Friday. The report showed that U.S. GDP growth was 3.2% in the beginning of 2019. Economists had been expecting a 2.1% growth rate. Analysts say the numbers indicate that even the federal government's partial shutdown, severe weather in some parts of the country, trade tensions with China, and Boeing's 737 MAX issues couldn't slow economic progress. President Donald Trump touted the report Friday morning.
We're doing great. GDP is an incredible number. But remember this, not only that, we have a great growth, which is growth. We have great growth and also very, very low inflation. Our economy is doing great. Number one in the world. We're number one economy right now in the world, and it's not even close.
Even though consumer spending was weak with a 1.2% growth rate overall, it appeared to pick up by the end of the quarter. Some experts caution that the strong GDP report is an indicator that growth will likely slow down later this year.
So because of different factors, the shutdown of the government, trade issues, I don't know why they think there are trade issues. There really aren't. The Boeing 737 issue, that's a real issue. And the orders that Boeing has lost as a result of that, they were expecting only 2.1% growth for the first quarter of 2019, which, were we back in the years of Obama, would actually be a great number. But not only did we not get 2.1%, we got a 50% higher number than was expected. And inflation stays low. Wow. Now, over at Bloomberg, which is run or owned by Michael Bloomberg, who is no friend of Donald Trump, they went in interesting directions on this. There was both grudging praise, and then there was really just people outright talking the number down. Let's start with the first one, where there was kind of, well, it's a good, but yeah, it's good. So you have that report. That came out. All of this was happening on Friday, the 26th of April.
So let's begin with the top story. The US looking like the best house on the block.
If you look at the underlying economy,
the underlying economy is doing well.
U.S. is not doing poorly.
Doing relatively well.
Looks reasonably stable.
The U.S. still has a growth momentum.
The economy had continued to grow.
Likely to grow.
Probably not as fast as we would like, but the back half of the year is going to be meaningfully better.
I see the U.S. economy in a really good place.
In good shape.
Pretty darn good. We think the U.S. economy is decelerating, but, nowhere close to a recession, just coming off the highs.
Joining me around the table to discuss is Michael Purvis, Whedon Chief Global Strategist, Michael Schumacher, Wells Fargo Global Head of Rate Strategy, and Gina Martin-Adams, Bloomberg Intelligence Chief Equity Strategist. So, Gina, let's begin with you. Before we start to poo-poo this number just a little bit, I think we should reflect on the fact that 4 or 5 months ago, people thought this would be the first quarter of the beginning of a recession in the United States. It is better than expected.
It is, and if you sort of sift through all of the noise of trade and inventories and kind of get down to a final demand number, it's steady state of growth. It's definitely a deceleration from where we were last year, but no form of, major deceleration that would suggest that we're imminently headed for recession. And I do think that we still have our issues, right? And that's evidenced in some of the spotty earnings releases that we've had this week. There definitely is an inventory excess that we've got to work our way through, very heavily concentrated in tech and industrial spaces specifically. But frankly, we're still growing. We're not in recession, and that's part of what the market bounce back has been all about.
Michael Purvis?
Yeah, and just to add to that, one of the striking things about these prints is that how light the inflation came in, and it really underscores this notion of continued inflation-like growth, which is going to be, of course, very constructive for risk assets.
Mike?
Yeah, strong growth. You can't really dismiss that. 3.2, it blows away any number out there, so I think you've got to look at that and say it's pretty good.
It's pretty good, huh? So this time last year, people were trying to say that we would be looking at the beginning of a recession. Let me remind you what a recession is, by definition, 2 consecutive quarters of negative GDP growth. They were actually predicting that we would be looking at negative GDP growth. Wow. At this time last year. And of course, when the shutdown occurred, I'm sure they were confident that they were going to get what they were trying to talk the American people into, which was a recession. It didn't happen. Well, that was the better information that you got from Bloomberg. Bloomberg also later that day, with the same young lady you may have heard toward the end, who was talking about things that were not as rosy as they could have been, they went straight to really kind of talking down this very positive development in the U.S. economy.
To recap here, it's 3.2% as opposed to a survey of 2.3%, and the core PCE was at 1.3% rather than 1.4%.
And personal consumption was at 1.2 compared to 2.5% the prior quarter. So that is a slowdown in personal consumption.
But better than expected.
Right.
The projection was 1.0.
Right. And some of that is an impact of the slowdown impacting consumption in January and into February. Right. So we could see a bounce back from that.
Because of the government shutdown, because of concerns about the market pullback, a lot of different factors.
Exactly.
So, Gina, is this further fuel for the fire when it comes to equities?
I think it's somewhat mixed. The key factor in here for me is the inventory line, because what we're seeing in the broader spectrum of S&P 500 earnings are the segments that are most sensitive to these bloated inventory situations where they've seen a slowdown in order growth. Now they're stuck with too much on their books. They're waiting for orders to start to pick up. Those are some of the weakest players in the S&P 500. Those are some of the industrials, some of even the energy companies, some of tech. I mean, we're seeing this certainly in semiconductor space, right? You had Texas Instruments and Intel suggest, hey, we're stuck with a lot here on our books, and demand is not necessarily improving going forward. So this is one of the big keys to managing a turnaround in the earnings stream is a depletion of this excess inventory so company business dynamics can start to accelerate once again.
I do wonder what it means, and not that I'm not happy about this report, but I do wonder about the second quarter. Then do we see the numbers rein in significantly?
Well, final sales to domestic producers was 2.5%. Okay. Right? So that is, again, above trend growth if you look at potential GDP of about 2. So we could see a slight downward trajectory in the second quarter, but that 2.5% number is a solid number.
Can someone explain to me why they are working so hard to talk down the American economy? Oh, well, we're going to be in recession. That's what they said last year. Well, next quarter is probably not going to be so good. Do you really think this is about Donald Trump? Because they do. They really do. And the interesting thing, to find good information about what's been happening, well, where is it? How much time have the news media, the press, that is supposed to be not the enemy of the American people, how much time have they spent talking about the ridiculous level of success of the American economy? Let me tell you why that matters. The American economy is not the success of a president. It is a success of the people. When the American economy is doing well, it is because the American people are doing something outstanding. Why would you not talk about that if you're the press and the friend of the American people? Why wouldn't you talk about the fact that they are expanding their economy at a rate that the experts missed by 50%? Why are you not talking about this? Why are you trying to find a way to say that it's not going to be that good going forward? Why were you a year ago saying that they were going to be not growing at all? It's more than that. Let's go back to the March jobs report, which was reported back on the 5th of April, I believe. CNBC gave this very quick roundup, and it was simply to the point and demonstrated how strong the economy and the job market is performing.
196,000 jobs. Non-farm payrolls rose by 196,000 jobs in March. The unemployment rate unchanged at 3.8%. Average hourly earnings, they were up 4 cents in March to $27.70. That's a 0.1% gain over the month and a 3.2% gain over the year. The payroll numbers for January and February were both revised upward from 311,000 to 312,000 in January and from 20,000 to 33,000 in February. Together, that's 14,000 more jobs than were previously reported. The 3-month moving average is 180,000 jobs. Now, job growth was strong, particularly in the healthcare sector, which added 49,000 jobs, but there were losses in some other sectors. Retail down nearly 12,000 jobs, and manufacturing down by 6,000 jobs. Labor force participation rate edged down from 63.2% to 63%, while U6, the broadest measure of unemployment, that was unchanged at 7.3%.
Bear something in mind. 3.8% was the U3 number, or the headline number for unemployment, versus a U6 of 7.3. How many times during the Obama administration did they talk about the U6 number? They hid that thing because it stayed in double digits for a significant portion of that presidency. Now they want to talk about, how come they didn't talk about labor force participation when Barack Obama was president? Well, it went down to 63. Yeah, it was like 62.5% versus the 63% you're seeing now. How come they didn't talk about that? It goes more than that, because you saw jobs are up, wages are up. Wow. Fox Business News, they actually did a report. You know, this stuff comes out, and a lot of the media will report on it, but the thing that's interesting is that it pops for a day, you'll get some reports, and then it's immediately covered up by other news both that day, and then they stop talking about the jobs report at all the day after it comes out. That's what I find fascinating. Here's what Fox Business News had to say about the March job report that came out and was spoken of in April.
Veronica and Lanny are back. What do you think, Lanny?
Well, look, I think it was a very good number, and I think it demonstrates a certain measure of resiliency in the economy. I think what you're seeing is that employers are still feeling very good about where things are headed. Now, I do think that there is some pressure going forward to get some of this trade stuff resolved. I think the president certainly has a task ahead in terms of getting the U.S., Mexico, Canada trade agreement across the finish line by the summer. But, you know, aside from those things, I think what's clear is that the labor market is strong, demand is still very strong, and talk of recession, I think, is way overblown.
Yeah. Veronica, he mentioned Resilience, the name of your new ebook, which is fantastic. And I don't just say that because I'm in it, which I am, and everybody should read it. But other than that, this economy is looking very resilient at this point. What do you think about the folks that are predicting a recession or a slowdown, and they think that somewhere in here is a hint of it?
Well, you look at this job report, and it was very positive, and I think it allays a lot of those fears of recession, at least for the near term. It's also really good news for consumers, right? Because if you look deeper into this jobs report, the wage growth is stronger. It's also stronger than the inflation numbers. So at the end of the day, the consumer has more money to spend and more money to take home. Not to mention businesses, yes, they're paying more in wages, but not so much more that it hurts their bottom line. So some good news all around, and thank you for being in the book.
Yeah, there you go. All right, guys, thank you. Have a great weekend.
A good number shows that the economy is resilient. Why does it show the economy is resilient? There was terrible weather in the first quarter of 2019. The government was shut down for 5 weeks, which was a record in 2019's first quarter. Yet the job report comes out and shows that it doesn't matter. So for everybody who was talking about how the government shutdown was going to kill jobs and kill the economy, well, what say you now? Even MSNBC and Morning Joe had to give it up for the March jobs report.
Let's go to Sarah Eisen, the New York Stock Exchange. She's got those latest numbers that we were talking about. Sarah, what do you got?
Pretty solid report here for March jobs, guys. Looks like we added 196,000 jobs, and that was better than economists were looking for. They were looking for 175,000. Unemployment rate stays steady at 3.8%. Another good number, really sitting near the half-century low. Remember, this is especially a relief because about a month ago, I brought you some shockingly bad numbers for the month of February when only 20,000 jobs were added. That did get revised higher, but only to 33,000. I think what today's number shows is that was a bit of an anomaly. You had the bad weather, the seasonal factors, the shutdown, all impacting the jobs number. So if you smooth it out and look at an average over the first 3 months of the year, guys, it's about an average of 180,000 jobs added per month. That is very decent. It's down from the 223,000 average we got for all of last year, but economists did expect some sort of moderation at this point in the economic recovery. One other number I'll bring you is wages. They moderated a bit from what we got last month, still growing 3.2% in March from last year. Another sign that workers are getting paid more in this tighter labor market that we've seen. Overall, it means we're not imminently heading into recession. Things are still doing okay on the jobs front.
So we're not heading into recession. Wages are growing 3%, 3.2% year over year. This March versus last March. Wow. Okay. And inflation is less than wage growth. This is one of the best stories in America. This is the best news story in America, period, and it's not what we're talking about day after day. It's not. This is a story that involves the 300 million people who live in America and the 160 plus million who make up America's labor force. We don't want to talk about that. I do. But the media doesn't want to talk about that. They want to talk about stuff that doesn't matter. They want to talk about family separation at the border. Well, we could have stopped family separation. Stop coming up here when you know you're going to be separated. You know what the U.S. laws are. You know what the rules are. The only reason you're coming up here is you believe that family separation is going to generate the empathy to allow you to stay here after coming here illegally. That's why. We want to talk about the Mueller report. Really? Robert Mueller spent almost 2 years on a nothing burger and came back with nothing. Well, he indicted people. He was supposed to be looking for Russian collusion. Tell me one person who went down for any type of collusion as a result of the Mueller investigation. There's not one. He even came out and said no collusion between Donald Trump and the Russian government or anyone in his campaign and the Russian government with regard to the election. But we keep talking about that. Well, what's going to happen with the report? There's got to be impeachment. For what? Well, there's obstruction of justice. If you haven't figured out by now that a president of the United States, a sitting president, doesn't have to commit obstruction of justice to shut down anything that he wants with regard to the Department of Justice. If he doesn't want something investigated, he simply says, stop it. And if it doesn't get stopped, he can fire everybody in the Department of Justice. Why are you focusing on those unimportant matters and not on the big deal that came as a result of not electing Hillary Clinton? The American people are blowing the doors off economically. They are raising the roof. They are performing at a level that no one believed they could. And they're doing it consistently, and they're doing it in a sustained manner. Why aren't we talking about this? Because they don't want Trump to get the credit. Because giving Trump the credit means that they can't have the credit. That nothing that they do, none of their anti-American policies actually produce anything beneficial from an economic standpoint for the American people. Therefore, we can't have that. Again, Trump happens to be sitting in the White House, but none of this is about Trump. The economic success is not about Trump. It's about you. All Trump did was take the government's foot off your neck. That's all he did. The job growth, not about Trump. It's about you. Trump's not hiring these people. Trump's not paying these people. The GDP growth, not about Trump. It's about you. The federal government means nothing. They shut it down for 5 weeks, and you still came up with economic growth that was 50% higher than was expected. Do you not get it yet? The media and the Democrats are all united in an effort to stop you. This is not about Donald Trump. But as always, the economy tells a much bigger picture about what's going on in America than any other soap opera type political story that's out there. The sooner you understand that, the better things are going to be for everyone. Stanley Levy, Black Man Thinking, will be back right after this. Stanley Levy, Black Man Thinking, here on the dominant force in internet conservatism, TalkAmericaRadio.us. Also WDDQ, Talk 92.1 FM in Valdosta, Georgia. WJHC, Talk 107.5 North Florida Talk Radio, Freedom in AmericaRadio.com, and WLBB News Talk, AM 1330 and FM 106.3 in Carrollton, Georgia. Pivoting from the economy, about which everybody cares, let's now move over to something about which primarily the media cares, and that is the Democrat Gong show primary field. Remember, the Democrats and the media were, of course, convinced that we would be looking at the re-election campaign of Hillary Clinton around this time, and of course there would be no Democrats to oppose her, being the first woman, just like there was no one to oppose Barack Obama, as he was the first black, so-called black president. There would have been no opposition to Hillary. It was just going to be a second coronation for her. Unfortunately, the first one did not occur. So now, since she lost, we have, at last count, with the addition of Joe Biden, 21 people in the field for the Democrat primary. Now, don't get me wrong, the number itself is not that out of line. I believe we had 16 or so in 2016 on the Republican side. However, I have to say that it's hard to take a number of the people who are running for president on the Democrat side seriously, and it's clear that not many Democrats take them seriously as well. Nevertheless, NBC or MSNBC took the time back on the 23rd to size up the field and to give us a good idea regarding where things were.
Even if I knew for certain that I was going to run for president back in Thanksgiving, my intention from the beginning is if I were to run, to be the last person to announce.
Welcome back. He might not be the last person to get in the race, but Joe Biden, it looks like, is on the verge of entering the Democratic presidential contest after months of suspense. And will he or won't he? Hand-wringing sources telling NBC News the former vice president will announce his 2020 campaign with an online video on Thursday morning. And so all the speculation we've had, Joe Biden, it looks like, is going to go for it. We've had all these polls out there that include him. He's not actually running. Well, now he'll actually be a candidate along with all the other announced candidates on here. Although, there's Bill de Blasio. He's in this one. He's not announced either. But Biden, how does he stack up right now as he enters this race? What are some of the emerging dynamics to look for in the Democratic field? This is the poll that was out today, Monmouth. It's very similar to what we've been seeing. Biden will enter this race as the front runner. That's not an overwhelming front runner by any historical standard. He's been getting in the high 20s in most polls. Sanders has been running second, and recently it's Pete Buttigieg who's been moving up. You see him tying for third place here. He was obviously an asterisk just a couple months ago. So that's the overall lay of the land on the Democratic side. Some very interesting divides that we see in this poll and that we have been seeing in other polls of the Democratic race right now. Let me take you through those. So first of all, let's start with the ideological divide. We're talking about, we hear all the stories, the Democratic Party's becoming more and more liberal. How's that going to affect? So folks in the Monmouth poll today who call themselves liberal, this is how they're breaking down. You see Sanders in first place there, Biden behind at 17, Buttigieg at 12. Okay, that's the liberals. How about the other half of the party, the other side of the party, I should say, moderates and conservatives? How do they compare? Take a look at this. Biden goes from 17% among liberals, more than doubles his support. He's the overwhelming, I say overwhelming, he's the strong choice here, plurality of moderate and conservative voters. Sanders doing 17% right there. So that's interesting. You have all that talk about, can Joe Biden win in today's Democratic Party? One of the things that I think he'll be relying on if he runs is there are still a fair number of Democrats who call themselves, who identify as moderate and conservative, and he's got to jump on the field there. Can he hang on to that? Can that be a big part of his base? The other thing you see here, Buttigieg, his rise, look, 12% among liberals, among moderates, conservatives, less than half of that, 5%. It's been more liberals who've been propelling him. How about the divide when it comes to age? You see folks under 50 years old here. Sanders out in front, Biden second place, Buttigieg 10%. Now let's go to the older demographic, 50 plus. Look at that. Again, Biden jumps into first place, but look at that drop for Bernie Sanders. From 30% among Democrats under 50 years old, it's cut in down to 10%, okay? Older voters, 50 plus. So again, you see an interesting age dynamic emerging right there. And here's one more. Race, white voters, Biden 27%. You see Sanders, Buttigieg, Warren, Harris, O'Rourke. How about non-white voters? Again, look at this. You see, first of all, Sanders doing fairly well with this group. We talked in 2016, his struggle with African-American voters. One of the big reasons Hillary Clinton was able to put him away. Is he going to improve this time? You see Kamala Harris, 11%. Here's another one, though. Pete Buttigieg, this coalition, this surge he's had early, he's getting 13% in this poll among white voters. Non-white voters, all the way down at 2%. So you see that Buttigieg coalition. A lot of people say, hey, that looks like Paul Tsongas, Gary Hart. We've seen that in the past. The question for Buttigieg, can he sustain what he has, and can he expand it in ways that folks with this early polling profile haven't in the past? That's something else we'll be keeping an eye on. Anyway, plenty of frontrunners have often failed to win their party's nomination, so we will see. Biden comes in, as you say, as a sort of weak frontrunner. Will he be any different? That's next.
The first thing I would say is someone needs decaf. But the real issue or real story here, or non-story, we went through all that discussion about who's in the race without ever really talking about why. Specifically, what policies are we talking about on the Democrat side? How come the Democrats don't really want to seem to talk about policy? Or more to the point, why is it that the media has such a problem talking about policy when it comes to the Democrat field? Could it be because they've tried to talk to them and they found out that the prescriptions or policy prescriptions that are being put out by Democrats are, one, very expensive with no stated means for how they would be funded, and they've decided that if they keep talking about that, then no Democrat has a hope in heck. Let's talk about some of the things that Democrats, particularly the ones who aren't running and those who are, want to refer to, as long as they refer to it obliquely and in other ways that don't take away from their sparkling personalities, which is all they're trying to run on, by the way. Universal child care. Okay, who's paying for that? Debt-free college. Let's think about that for a minute. We've already tried to do loans. Oh, we don't want loans. We want college to be free. Who's paying for that? Guaranteed income. Stop. Guaranteed, whether you work or not, even if you don't want to work, you should have money. We already have that. It's called welfare. But never mind. Reparations. So this is making, quote unquote, white people who had nothing to do with slavery pay blacks who were never enslaved about something that happened more than 150 years ago, ended more than 150 years ago. That is a campaign issue for Democrats. Affordable housing. What does that mean? Well, you know, let me help you out with this. If you don't make a lot of money, you don't live in the nicest places. That's not an American issue. That's a world issue. You want to live someplace nice? You make more money. If you don't make a lot of money, you don't have the same number of choices. Medicare for all. Let's not forget that Medicare, current Medicare for some, has more unfunded liabilities than the federal government has debt. The unfunded liabilities for Social Security and Medicare dwarf the national debt. But you want to do that for everybody. I wonder what that's going to do to the federal budget and the federal deficit and all that, and the national debt and everything else. Nothing that the Democrats have as a policy prescription would work except on a drawing board. Why do you think Obamacare is now unconstitutional? Nevertheless, they persist. And recently, the 21st member and counting in the primary race for the Democrat nomination for president finally stuck his neck in, or threw his hat into the ring.
We have big political news this morning. Former Vice President Joe Biden is now a 2020 presidential candidate. He released a 3-minute campaign video this morning calling out the 2017 white nationalist rally in Charlottesville, Virginia, and President Trump's response that there were, quote, very fine people on both sides.
And a senior campaign says that for Biden, what happened in Charlottesville, quote, shook him to the core. And it is the moment that he decided he had to run.
I believe history will look back on 4 years of this president and all he embraces as an aberrant moment in time. But if we give Donald Trump 8 years in the White House, he will forever and fundamentally alter the character of this nation, who we are, and I cannot stand by and watch that happen.
Biden is now the 21st candidate for the Democratic nomination, and polls show that right now he is one of the favorites to win it. Ed O'Keefe is covering the 2020 campaign. Good to see you.
Good to see you guys.
He's using that phrase again, that this is the battle for the soul of this nation. What does that tell us about how he's going to wage this campaign?
It tells us he's ready to throw some punches, and is far more willing to do it than other Democrats in the race so far. So we'll see. Now, in that video this morning, Biden talks about how he believes Americans are in a battle for the soul of the nation. And in the coming days, we expect to hear Biden talk about restoring an inclusive middle class. We've talked several times this year about the diversity of the Democratic field, more women, minorities. There's an openly gay candidate. Now, consider the age gap. At 76, Biden is the second oldest candidate in the field of Democratic contenders, behind the 77-year-old Bernie Sanders. When Biden ran for president in 1988, this cycle's youngest candidate, 37-year-old Pete Buttigieg of South Bend, Indiana, was just in kindergarten. It's unclear if Biden's more than 40 years of public experience will translate to voter support. Also unclear what kind of financial support Biden will earn. His first test is how much money he raises today. The number to beat is $6.1 million raised by Beto O'Rourke on his first day on the campaign trail earlier this year. You might also be wondering about Joe Biden's former boss, President Obama, and where he stands in all this. In a statement this morning, he said picking Biden as his running mate in 2008 was, quote, one of the best decisions he ever made. But we're told he is unlikely to throw his support behind a specific candidate this early in the campaign.
But it's interesting, too. I mean, he's really talking about that the core values of this nation are at stake. I mean, he comes with a wealth of background, and to take him on essentially what are issues of character.
Sure, exactly. He founds his announcement in Charlottesville, Virginia in August of 2017 and is making a claim. He talks about America shouldn't be a place where you give hate safe harbor, which is an attack on the president.
Yeah, and I mean, look, all these other candidates are focused on themselves, who they are, what they would do. It is telling that somebody who has universal name recognition is willing to spend a little capital right here at the start focusing on his opponent.
He doesn't need to introduce himself to voters. They already know his bio.
Should we be surprised Obama is holding back at this point?
No, because, I mean, I think if the shoe were on the other foot, years ago, or however many, I can't do math this early in the morning, but he wouldn't have wanted an incumbent stepping on the race and would have understood that, as somebody who came from behind to win it, improbably, in the view of many people, it should be a wide open race. We'll see.
All right, Ed, thanks.
This is hilarious to me. Now, first of all, let's give Joe Biden his due. He did come out and raise $6.3 million, which was a little bit more than Beto O'Rourke, who is where now? He's supposed to be running for president. He raised $6.1 million his first day and then disappeared. Joe Biden came out and got $6.3 million. But let's talk about some of the things in that video. Charlottesville, and the president's reaction to Charlottesville was the decision point for him. But in the prior video that I played, which was just from April 23rd of this year, he said he hadn't decided. So which one is it, Joe? Did you decide in 2017 in Charlottesville, or you decide in 2019? Which one was it? How come you didn't announce? What's the whole thing? Why were you telling people that you weren't sure? I don't get that. There's also, here's a real interesting fact. Joe Biden enters the race as one of the front runners. He's never won a primary race. He's never won the nomination. Never. He's tried twice. He has never won any election outside the state of Delaware. I'm sorry. But now all of a sudden, he is going to... We keep forgetting something. The Obama era was soundly rejected in 2016, and he was associated with it for 8 years. I guess he's going to dissociate himself from it, and that's why he doesn't want Obama's endorsement. We already saw what an Obama endorsement can do for you. Ask Hillary. And then there's the issue of character. Joe Biden, Mr. Grab every female that he can and sniff hair whenever he gets an opportunity. Character. Joe Biden's nobody's model or role model with regard to character. That's just not the way this works out at all. Now, with respect to the polling, let's take a look at some of the things. Biden, I'm looking at Real Clear Politics on their polling, and they're looking at average through, I think it was the 15th of April, even before Biden came into the race. He was ahead. Think about this. A guy who wasn't even in the race was ahead of Sanders, and both Sanders and Biden are pushing 80. And then you drop off, and I mean drop off. It goes from 23% with Sanders in second place all the way down to Kamala Harris, who recently is saying she's going to ban or seek to ban right-to-work laws. So if you're not in a union, you're not allowed to work in the United States. She's down at 8.3%. Buttigieg, the openly gay mayor who's supposed to be the smartest guy in the room. Well, we've already had an openly gay guy in the White House. His name was Barack Obama. How'd that work out? He was the smartest guy in the room. How'd that work out? Well, he's at 7%, and people are talking about him like he's on his way to the nomination now. It's 7%. Elizabeth Warren, I have no idea why she's in the race. It's 6.5%. Beto O'Rourke is behind her. Cory Booker was last cited, I don't know where, but he's less than 4%. Amy Klobuchar, I don't know why she's in it anymore. Andrew Yang, who is that? Julian Castro, who is that? Hickenlooper, the former governor of Colorado, at 1%. Kirsten Gillibrand, less than 1%. Tulsi Gabbard, 0.5%. Look, this is nonsense. None of these people are going anywhere. They have no message. And their front runner is someone who was twice unsuccessful in seeking the nomination and is associated with one of the worst presidencies, particularly economic presidencies, in the history of the Republic. It's a gong show. None of these people have anything to say that matters. All they want to do is take money from people and give it to people who didn't earn it. And they want you to go along with it because it's the right thing to do. Well, the right thing to do is go out and get a job and earn your own money and make your way. That's the American thing to do. But in the mind of the progressive, that's just not the right thing to do. This is nonsense. But this is your Democrat Party. Stanley, Levy, Black Man Thinking. We'll be back right after this. Stanley Levy, Black Man Thinking, here on the dominant force in internet conservatism, TalkAmericaRadio.us. Also WDDQ, Talk 92.1 FM in Valdosta, Georgia, WJHC, Talk 107.5 North Florida Talk Radio, FreedomInAmericaRadio.com, and WLBB News Talk, AM 1330 and FM 106.3 in Carrollton, Georgia. Final segment of this first hour. Let's just put it out there. The Democrats have one plank in their 2020 platform. It is impeaching Donald Trump, which is kind of odd because how does getting rid of the guy who's currently president help you become president? Wouldn't it make more sense that you want to defeat him at the polls as opposed to trying to have him removed politically, which doesn't make you any better because the majority of the folks who are in this race for the Democrats have no say on impeachment. They're not House members. One's a House member. There are a few senators, but there's 21 people running now. Some of them aren't even in government at all. Joe Biden's not in government at all, but he's the front runner. So they don't have any real prescription except that they hate Donald Trump. That's why they're running, not because they love the American people, but because they hate Donald Trump. CNN's Fareed Zakarian offered some advice to them regarding this, hopefully to get them on the right track. I just don't think it's going to be very successful.
Consider for a moment what the growing talk of impeachment among Democrats sounds like to the tens of millions of people who voted for Donald Trump. Many of them supported him because they feel ignored, mocked, and condescended to by the country's urban, educated, and cosmopolitan elites, especially lawyers and journalists. So what happens when their guy gets elected? These same elites pursue a series of maneuvers to try to overturn the results of the 2016 election. It would massively increase the class resentment that feeds support for Trump. It would turn the topic away from his misdeeds and towards the Democrats' overreach and obsessions. And ultimately, of course, it would fail. 2/3 of this Republican-controlled Senate would not vote to convict Trump, allowing the president to brandish his acquittal like a gold medal across the country. I know. Many argue passionately that this is not a political affair, but rather a moral and a legal one. After reading the Mueller report, they say Congress has no option but to fulfill its obligation and impeach Trump. But this view misunderstands impeachment entirely. It is by design an inherently political process, not a legal one. That's why the standard used, high crimes and misdemeanors, is not one used in criminal procedures. And that is why the decision is entrusted to a political body, Congress, not the courts. Of the 3 cases in America's past, history's judgment is that only one was wholly justified, the impeachment proceedings against Richard Nixon. President Andrew Johnson's decision to fire his Secretary of War, clearly lawful, should not have led to his impeachment. The same is true for Bill Clinton's failed Whitewater land deal, which triggered an independent counsel inquiry that went into completely unrelated areas. For some Democrats, impeachment talk might be a smart, if cynical, short-term calculation. If you are running for the Democratic nomination, say, it is a way to get attention. If you are consolidating your support with the party's base, the more fiercely anti-Trump you are, the better. But all these moves only work as long as House Speaker Nancy Pelosi slow rolls the process and stops it from getting out of hand. The Democrats have a much better path in front of them. They should pursue legitimate investigations of Trump, bring in witnesses, and release documentary proof of wrongdoing. But they should at the same time show the public that they would be a refreshing contrast to Trump, substantive, policy-oriented, civil, and focused on the country, not on their base. America is tired of the circus of Donald Trump. That doesn't mean they want the circus of the House Democrats. Trump is vulnerable. With strong economic numbers, he has astonishingly low approval ratings. He will likely run his 2020 campaign on cultural nationalism as he did the last one. Democrats need to decide what their vision will be. That should be their focus for the next 2 years, not the unfounded hope that if they pursue impeachment, somehow a series of miracles will take place, a deeply divided country will coalesce around them, and Republicans will finally abandon their president. The real challenge for Democrats goes beyond Trump. It is Trumpism, a right-wing populism that has swelled in the United States over the past decade. Surely the best way to take it on is to combat it ideologically and defeat it electorally. That is the only way to give the Democrats the real prize, which is not Donald Trump's scalp, but the power and legitimacy to forge a governing majority.
That sounds wonderful, doesn't it? Don't try to impeach him. Go ahead and compete in the marketplace of ideas and show that your ideas are better. Well, let's remember their ideas. Universal child care, debt-free college, guaranteed income, reparations, Medicare for all. No, you're playing to your base. You don't have an agenda for the rest of the country. If you did, Hillary would have won the election that you were trying to hand her. So the only thing there is left is impeachment. And Senator Lindsey Graham, who is of late a tremendous Trump supporter, laid out what he believes is going to happen in the House.
Right, following the release of the Mueller report last week, questions are rightly being asked about what comes next. Congressman Doug Collins tweeted this, quote, claims Mueller report punts the special counsel's work to Congress is just wrong. The report analyzes Congress's constitutional authority to legislate. It does not upend the separation of powers by calling Congress to continue a completed DOJ investigation. Joining us now in his first interview, by the way, since the Mueller report came out, he was out of the country, Senate Judiciary Committee Chairman Lindsey Graham. Well, we kind of needed you last week, and there you are. I don't know where the heck you were, but we could have used you.
I'd have to shoot you.
All right, let's get your general thoughts and reaction, and more importantly, what you're going to do.
Okay. Well, number one, the idea that the Mueller report is not the final word on all things Trump, Russia, collusion, and obstruction is news to me. I thought we all trusted Mueller. So here's what I think is going on in the House. There's going to be a stampede to impeach President Trump. They're going to use the Mueller report, anything they can find to try to destroy his presidency. Nancy Pelosi's not in charge of the Democratic Party. The radical left is in charge. So I expect that they will be impeachment proceedings against President Trump. And the Mueller report, to me, is vindication of President Trump.
Well, you said it's over. I agree with you. You said a stampede for impeachment.
It is over for me.
Let me tell you, I think that we have had 9-month investigation by the FBI. Even Strucker Page said there's no there. We had nothing, Page said. Then we had the House Intel Committee investigation. Then the bipartisan Senate Committee. Now the Mueller report. You can't say it any more clearly, no collusion. So now the American people, the answer's in on this. If they want to do this, on top of the Green Deal, what are the political ramifications for not serving the American people?
Well, I think they'll get punished in 2020, and I think President Trump will get reelected. I know what happened in 98 when the American people understood what they got with Bill Clinton. They understand President Trump, warts and all. And Mueller was the guy that I was going to make sure he looked at the idea of Trump working with the Russians. The verdict is in. There was no collusion. There's no obstruction of a crime that never occurred. The obstruction thing was bizarre to me to begin with. So here's what I think. They're going to be stampeded to impeach Trump because they hate him so much. And I hate it for the country. I hate it for the president. But it's going to result in him getting reelected. The media is not covering the Trump presidency. They're trying to destroy it. The Democratic Party doesn't accept the fact that President Trump won. So at the end of the day, we're just going to have to deal with this in 2020 at the ballot box.
So there are three big components here that have not been resolved. We now know the investigation into Hillary was rigged. Even Strucker Page said, Loretta Lynch was running every decision. A matter, not an investigation. Then we have the attempt to use a phony Russian dossier, even the New York Times admitting tonight, which is interesting. Washington Post writing, Fox News was right, especially Hannity, whatever. But more importantly, it's not about who's right. But a rigged investigation, an attempt to rig a presidential election, and then undo and unseat a duly elected president. What will you do specifically?
Well, there's before and after the campaign. before the campaign, I want to find out, did George Papadopoulos, was he working with the Russians, or did they plant in his mind that the Russians had Hillary Clinton's email? In other words, did the knowledge about Russia and the Clinton emails come from somebody other than Russia? How could you use the dossier 4 different times to get a warrant against an American citizen when it's a bunch of garbage? Why didn't they tell the court that it was a politically motivated document? I'm going to try to find out about the counterintelligence investigation, about how the FISA warrant was obtained against Carter Page. Was there an effort to invoke the 25th Amendment? Who's telling the truth, McCabe or Rosenstein? The person who leaked to the Washington Post that General Flynn was being surveilled during the transition period, if you can find out that person, that's probably the one who started all of this.
It might be long, it might be a lot earlier than the date we were told, which is July 31st. And did they outsource?
And here is your problem, by the way. The whole thing with that really comes down to, you investigated Trump and all you found was the people going after him being dirty. And now you want to impeach Trump, but you're not looking to put any consequence upon those who treated him unfairly and in an illegal manner in the process. Wow. I don't think that's really going to go very well. But that's all the Democrats have, because they have no ideas. They are on a losing streak that began with the election of Barack Obama. They've lost governorships. They've lost state legislatures. And no, they have not gotten them back. They lost the presidency, and it doesn't look like that's coming back. Because they have no ideas, and they have no concern at their core for the American people doing what Americans do, which is being exceptional. They don't want Americans to be exceptional. They want Americans to be controlled. They want Americans to be like everyone else and to bend to the will of progressivism. If America rejects that again in 2020, which I believe they should, and I hope they will, then I don't know what the Democrat Party does except totally remake. And with that, I'm going to turn this over to my good friend Ron Edwards, and after that, we'll be back with Hour 2 of Black Man Thinking.
How low can a legislator go? Only a Democrat knows for sure. Hello, I'm Ron Edwards. On today's page from the Edwards Notebook, Ohio Democrat Representative Jeanine Boyd recently drafted an amendment that Margaret Sanger, the KKK gumps, and most Democrats would just love. Representative Boyd, like most Democrats, hates the concept of protecting babies, especially black ones, from being murdered via abortion. So she drafted a piece of garbage legislation that would exempt black babies from being protected by the heartbeat bill that bans the abortion of babies in Ohio once a heartbeat is detected. Democrat legislator Jeanine Boyd said that she sees the heartbeat bill as problematic for the black American community and compared the protection of unborn black infants to the slave trade. She also said, quote, I consider the slave trade and how black slaves were treated like cattle and put out to stud in order to create more generations of slaves, unquote. What that has to do with stopping the murder of innocent babies, I do not know and don't want to find out, actually. I'm Ron Edwards. Join me Fridays at 1 p.m. Pacific, 4 p.m. Eastern on AmericaMatters.us and Sundays at 12 a.m. Eastern on Talk America Radio Network.
Ron Edwards, the new voice of America.
Sponsored by David E. Garrett Jewelers.
I have a dream. One day, this nation will rise up, live out the true meaning of its creed. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal.
Black Men Thinkin.
Freedom is never more than one generation away from extinction. We didn't pass it on to our children in the bloodstream. The only way they can inherit the freedom we have known is if we fight for it, protect it, defend it, and then hand it to them with the well-taught lessons of how they in their lifetime must do the same.
Black Men Thinkin.
Anytime you throw your weight behind a political party that controls 2/3 of the government, and that party can't keep the promise that it made to you during election time, and you're dumb enough to walk around continuing to identify yourself with that party, you're not only a chump, but you're a traitor to your race.
Black Men Thinkin.
If we lose freedom here, there's no place to escape to. This is the last stand on earth. And this idea that government is beholden to the people, that it has no other source of power except the sovereign people, is still the newest and the most unique idea in all the long history of man's relation to man. Whether we believe in our capacity for self-government or whether we abandon the American Revolution and confess that a little intellectual elite in a far distant capital can plan our lives for us better than we can plan them ourselves.
Black Man Thinkin.
In this present crisis, government is not the solution to our problem. Government is the problem.
Black Man Thinkin.
Stanley Levy with Hour 2 of Black Man Thinkin, and here on the dominant force in Internet conservatism, TalkAmericaRadio.us. Also WDDQ, Talk 92.1, FM in Valdosta, Georgia, WJHC, Talk 107.5 FM, North Florida Talk Radio, Freedom in AmericaRadio.com, and WLBB News Talk, AM 1330, and FM 106.3 in Carrollton, Georgia. Let's talk about the robed killers in Kansas for a moment, shall we? The Kansas Supreme Court, back on the 26th of April, which I think was this past Friday, issued a rather interesting ruling regarding abortion.
On Friday, the Kansas Supreme Court ruled that the state's constitution protects a woman's rights to an abortion. The lead counsel on the lawsuit says that because of the decision, abortion would remain legal in the state even if Roe v. Wade were overturned. And because the decision was made in the state's highest court, there is no path for an appeal. Genevieve Scott was the lead counsel on that lawsuit and is a senior staff attorney at the Center for Reproductive Rights. Thank you for joining us, Genevieve. How did you convince the judges to come to this decision?
Well, we at the Center for Reproductive Rights brought this case approximately 4 years ago, and we were able to convince the judges to make this decision because we presented them with, I believe, a very strong case about the underlying rights in the Kansas Constitution that all citizens should be able to have. And the Kansas Supreme Court ruled today that all citizens in their state have a liberty right to be able to make decisions about their own bodies and their own lives and their own families, and that women are not excluded from those rights even when they're pregnant.
And you've been on other cases, but what do you find most significant about this ruling specifically?
Well, what's so significant and exciting about this ruling in particular is that the Kansas Supreme Court has recognized an independent right to abortion that is independent from the federal right. And in doing so, they have protected the rights of Kansas citizens, even if Roe versus Wade is undercut or completely struck down.
So how will this decision make it difficult for the state to pass regulations to restrict the procedure if they wanted to?
The Kansas Supreme Court struck down a ban in this case that was completely medically unnecessary and only had political purposes. And what the Kansas Supreme Court did was it made clear that the right to abortion is a fundamental right, and that there is an extremely high bar for the state to be able to pass restrictions that are going to prevent women from being able to access that right.
Do you think we can expect the current restrictions on abortion in the state to change?
Well, there has been an onslaught of restrictions on access to abortion, both in Kansas and in the United States more generally. Since 2010, over 400 bills have been passed seeking to restrict access and chip away at access to make it impossible, practically speaking, for women to be able to access abortion and make decisions about their own bodies. What is so exciting and interesting about what happened today is, as I said, the court recognized that the right to abortion is a fundamental right that will be subject to the most exacting scrutiny, and that when a court considers a restriction on that right, there's going to be an extremely high bar to justify that. That will be very difficult for the state to overcome.
And taking into consideration that Kansas is traditionally a conservative state, what might this decision mean for future cases that deal with this basic human right that you're saying?
Well, what's so important and exciting about this decision is that the court recognized that not just women, but all citizens in Kansas have basic rights to make decisions about their own bodies, to be able to make decisions about their family lives, and to be able to make decisions about their health. These are the same kinds of basic human rights that the Center for Reproductive Rights advocates for in the United States and across the globe. And we are thrilled to see that these principles have been embraced by the Kansas Supreme Court and recognized as part of the basic rights that are due to all citizens, including pregnant women.
Genevieve Scott, thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me.
Let's kind of dig into this, shall we? So the idea is that abortion is a basic human right. So killing someone because you don't want to be bothered with them is a basic human right. If that is the case, I would love to hear the logic upon which the Black Lives Matter movement stands in citing that police brutality is this big problem. Why should a police officer deal with someone he doesn't want to, who is probably breaking the law? Why should he? Particularly in Kansas, he has a right over his own body. He has a right to make these decisions. And the decision to kill someone with which you do not want to be bothered was just upheld in Kansas. So, at least in Kansas, police officers should be able to go up to any suspect who is giving them a hard time and feel no compulsion to refrain from deadly force. If you can kill a child in the womb without consequence, why shouldn't you be able to kill a lawbreaker in the street? I don't understand the logic on that one. The other thing is, the ruling was to say that all citizens have a right. So let me get this straight. The woman is a citizen, but the child in her womb is not? Well, the child is a human being. And the reason we know it's a human being, because in Kansas, as in other places, if you kill a pregnant woman and her child dies as well, whoever does that can be charged with 2 counts of murder. Well, I'm sorry, murder is of a human being. So if the woman who is a human being is a citizen of the state of Kansas, how is it that the child in her womb would not be a citizen of the state of Kansas so long as he lived? And if he's alive, doesn't he have the same rights as any other citizen? Any other minor citizen, at the very least. So wow, I am really floored by some of this. The logic is terrible. The logic is bad. Now, there's the false link to Roe versus Wade is always. There is this idea that if Roe versus Wade is repealed, which it should be, that automatically abortion becomes illegal throughout the nation, when the truth of the matter is, if or once Roe versus Wade is repealed, it simply becomes a state matter. The federal government no longer has any say. If the people of the state, pick your state, want abortion to proceed in their state, then it will. If they do not, then it will not. Now, what happened here is the way this was done. Since the Supreme Court made this ruling, they're saying there is no path to appeal. We'll get back to that later. But think about that. The judges can sit back and make a decision, and all the millions of people in Kansas can say nothing? You want to talk about a dictatorship? Where is liberty? You basically say the political process ends at the courthouse steps? Once these people make a ruling, there is no political process, there's no path, there's nothing, you can do nothing? That sounds odd to me. And the female lawyer, it's always a female. I'll get more into that, I think, in a minute. Was decrying that 400 laws had been passed in this country in different states, not just Kansas, obviously, that restrict abortion access and restrict abortion, quote-unquote, rights. Well, in case she's not quite operating with a full deck, there's a reason for that. The American people do not like the practice of killing children in the womb. Therefore, despite the number of women who think it's a great thing to do, laws are being passed because people are voting for politicians to be elected officials who will oppose killing children in the womb. That is why 400 laws and statutes have been passed. And now in Kansas, the Supreme Court of that state has said, well, we can't do that here because this is a fundamental right. You know, if you look at this, and I found this and I was kind of just like, wow, odd in a way. Back in 1972, 60 Minutes, back when Mike Wallace was near the height of his powers, did a report on the abortion debate just before, the year before, there was the ruling known as Roe v. Wade. Take a listen.
60 Minutes, Rewind.
Today we find it the center of a gathering storm as women and men argue the question of abortion, the right to life or the woman's right to choose. It's a highly charged issue and a political one as well. In the last 10 days, the President of the United States has rejected recommendations made by his own appointed Commission on Population Growth that urged liberalized abortion laws. And then the President injected himself into the controversy with a letter to Cardinal Cook, head of the Catholic Archdiocese of New York, supporting the Church's fight against liberal abortion laws. This week, the New York State Legislature voted to repeal the 2-year-old law that had given New York State the most liberal abortion policy in the country, permitting abortion on demand within the first 24 weeks of pregnancy. Governor Nelson Rockefeller vetoed this repeal bill. But the fight continues across the country. Both sides press their propaganda war with rallies and marches, slogans and posters. The laws on abortion vary from state to state. 3 states, Washington, Alaska, and Hawaii, have abortion laws somewhat similar to New York's, but with residency requirements. 13 states have laws permitting legal abortion in certain circumstances. All the rest prohibit abortion except to save the life of the pregnant woman. Each demonstration, each parade, be it in Atlanta or New York City or wherever, attracts opposing pickets. The result, a melange of slogans and statements. Heated debate on abortion is taking place throughout the country. You can hear it in churches, in women's clubs, on college campuses and state legislatures. One lawmaker brought a fetus in a bottle to the New York debate.
Here's your victim, Mr. Blumenthal. Right here. In the jar. Unobserved by the majority of members of this House because many of them haven't got the courage to come over here and look at it.
That decision is personal. Not only for the people of the state of New York, but for each and every member of this legislature. And I'm not going to have 149 members of this legislature tell my wife what her decision should be in case she desires an abortion.
I don't know how to measure the beginning of life except at the point of conception. For me, there is no other benchmark in place of the hospital being a place where you go to preserve life, to cure illness. We have the shameful situation where a part of that facility which is dedicated to the preservation of life is used to deliberately kill.
There should be no man, no priest or politician, no doctor or any hospital administrator, no government official or husband who should have the right to force any woman to have a child against her will. I think that the time is here now that we as women must fight the established restrictions that exist on a woman's right to control her own reproductive processes, and that this is a right that no state should be allowed to abridge.
I don't feel it's ever been proven that the child, that the fetus within the womb is not human. I've heard a lot of arguments, and I still haven't heard that it is not human.
The decisive battles over the question of abortion are taking place in the legislatures and in the courts, where the old and the new laws written in the legislatures are being challenged. The Supreme Court has been asked to rule specifically whether laws restricting abortion in Texas and Georgia are a violation of the right to privacy and a denial of individual rights guaranteed by the Constitution. If the Supreme Court decides that Texas and Georgia laws on abortion are unconstitutional, that would open the way to legalized abortion throughout the country. But if the Supreme Court decides that a woman's constitutional rights are not breached by anti-abortion laws, well, then it seems likely the opposing forces will continue to do battle for many Mother's Days to come.
Here is the interesting thing. The murderers won the debate, yet the debate is not over. They are still coming after unborn children without relent. Some of the arguments in this are really strange. The implication that there is no victim with regard to abortion when someone actually has to die. That is the purpose of abortion, to cause a death. But there's no victim. It's a human death, by the way, but there's no victim. The idea that this is needed for population control. How long have we been hearing that? That if we don't allow women to kill children in the womb, then the earth will become overpopulated. They've been saying that for longer than the last 40, 46, 47 years. How come the earth isn't full yet? Because there are at least 1 billion more people on the planet now than there was in the 1970s. And we don't seem to be running out of room yet. Then there's the man's issue lie. Let me make sure we understand this. Women have a right to abortion, quote unquote, because men are weak. Men won't stand up for the simple principle that you don't kill people who've done you no harm. And maybe you, women, need to take responsibility for your own reproductive decisions by not getting pregnant. Well, it takes two. You know what? You have a responsibility as a female, a God-given responsibility to protect the life that He has given you. No man put the baby in you. There are people who have sex every day, several times a day sometimes, and they do not conceive because God is the one that gives conception. You do have a responsibility. Many women do not want to accept it, but you do have a responsibility to protect life. The fact that you would argue with people over the quote-unquote unfettered right, unaccountable right to kill a human being because it is inconvenient for you is one of the most heinous things that I can personally imagine. But that is exactly what the Kansas Supreme Court came up with back on Friday. They invented a state constitutional right to kill unborn Kansans. Yes, unborn Kansans. That's what they are. And specifically the medical procedure by which children are dismembered and removed from the womb. That was the specific procedure. You'll notice in the first clip, the women talking around it never came back to talk about what it was. The law was about the medical procedure where someone reaches into the womb and pulls a baby out one piece at a time. The Kansas Supreme Court said that women have a right to do that to another human being. They ruled that the state constitution's Bill of Rights affords protection of the right of personal autonomy, which includes the ability to control one's own body, and extend that protection to the decision of whether to have an abortion. What about the right to control one's own body when you're in the womb? That is a body. That is a human being. They feel pain. They are people. The idea that you're not a person until you're born, oh my goodness. So let me get this straight. Until Jesus emerged from the womb, he was not the son of, really? He was not the Messiah until he made it out of the womb, huh? When John the Baptist, when he heard Mary's voice while he was in the womb, he leaped inside the womb of his mother at the sound of Mary's voice, hearing the voice of the mother of the Messiah. I guess he's not a person. Let's just move on. What they actually did was rule that those who die from abortion are not entitled to the same rights or protections as women. That includes little girls in the womb as well. They said they're not entitled to the same protection as women, as though these are not human beings at all. There was one bright spot in this whole thing. Justice Caleb Stegall. He dissented from the ruling in a pretty long statement in the decision. And he said that the decision that was delivered altered Kansas government to increase the state's power. Did one thing. Because where are the people in this? If the people don't want this and you've taken the appeal away from them, where's their power? They used this increased power to grant a regulatory reprieve to the judicially privileged act of abortion. They rejected here we go. They rejected the original public meaning of Section 1 of the Kansas Constitution Bill of Rights. They rewrote it. Just like in 1973, they rewrote the U.S. Constitution to invent a right to privacy. That's nowhere in the Constitution. To invent the right to kill someone just because it's inconvenient to you. That's not in the Constitution. And they painted the interest in unborn, this is a quote, the interest in unborn life championed by millions of Kansans as rooted in an ugly prejudice. So you are anti-woman if you don't want to see children killed in the womb. That is what they're doing. You got to remember something, though. Unless a government does those things, unless it does specifically those things, calls a desire to see life spared prejudiced, and invents rights that no one invents, thoughts and rights for women that appear nowhere and are against the interest of every other human being around. If government does not do those things, it cannot maintain the institution of legal infanticide. Fortunately, not only do we have a ray of hope from one justice on the Kansas Supreme Court, obviously in the minority, but Kansas abortion opponents do have options, which include advocating to amend the state constitution. I love it. Well, they have no process of appeal. Well, guess what? The Constitution can be rewritten. And if so, this ruling becomes null and void. Well, you can't do that. Excuse me. Let's remember what happened to Obamacare. Obamacare was ruled constitutional because John Roberts, Chief Justice of the U.S. Supreme Court, said that the financial penalty associated with the individual mandate was a tax. The law never states it as a tax. It calls it a penalty. It doesn't call it a tax. He called it a tax, and since the 16th Amendment puts no prohibitions on Congress's ability to levy taxes, therefore it was constitutional. When the Congress removed the financial penalty from the individual mandate, then the Supreme Court lost its ability to call it constitutional, and Obamacare has been unconstitutional since December 2018. So they could amend the state constitution. And for those who are saying it doesn't happen, well, that has already occurred in Alabama, in Tennessee, and in West Virginia. They already have amended their constitutions to protect unborn life. Also, in nearby Ohio, relatively nearby Ohio, the heartbeat bill has not only passed both houses of the state legislature, but been signed by the governor, which means once a child's heartbeat can be detected, it is illegal to kill him in the womb. Understand this. The arc of morality is long, and men and women often fail it. But you can see that the American people are finding their way back to that arc. And that arc will never favor a woman's heinous choice over the life of a child fashioned in her womb. And the reason the debate continues is because abortion proponents have never been a moral people. Stanley, Levy, Black Man Thinkin'. We'll be back right after this. Stanley Levy, Black Man Thinkin', here on the dominant force of internet conservatism, TalkAmericaRadio.us, also WDDQ, Talk 92.1 FM in Valdosta, Georgia, WJHC, Talk 107.5, North Florida Talk Radio, FreedomInAmericaRadio.com, and WLBB News Talk, AM 1330 and FM 106.3 in Carrollton, Georgia. Final segment of the show. After talking about abortion and what's being done in Kansas, as people want to try, or at least want to attempt what is right, to have judges virtually shut down their paths to do so in an orderly manner, it just got in my mind to say, you know what, maybe it's time to take a little bit of inventory and really focus on what's happening in this society and what is really being fought for, and in a lot of cases fought against. My mind went to something that I had heard once, and because of the way it was put together and the way it was delivered, it kind of stuck with me. Back in April of 1965, Paul Harvey, a legendary radio broadcaster, delivered a sermon of sorts, but a message to the American people to warn them about what was happening in their midst, that they were not standing up to it. This is Mr. Harvey from April of 1965.
If I were the devil, if I were the devil, if I were the prince of darkness, I'd want to engulf the whole world in darkness, and I'd have a third of its real estate and 4/5 of its population, but I wouldn't be happy until I had seized the ripest apple on the tree. Thee. So I'd set about, however necessary, to take over the United States. I'd subvert the churches first. I'd begin with a campaign of whispers. With the wisdom of a serpent, I would whisper to you as I whispered to Eve, do as you please. To the young, I would whisper that the Bible is a myth. I would convince them that man created God instead of the other way around. I would confide that what's bad is good and what's good is square. And the old, I would teach to pray after me. Our Father, which art in Washington. And then I'd get organized. I'd educate authors in how to make lurid literature exciting so that anything else would appear dull and uninteresting. I'd threaten TV with dirtier movies and vice versa. I'd peddle narcotics to whom I could. I'd sell alcohol to ladies and gentlemen of distinction. I'd tranquilize the rest with pills. If I were the devil, I'd soon have families at war with themselves, churches at war with themselves, and nations at war with themselves, until each in its turn was consumed. And with promises of higher ratings, I'd have mesmerizing media fanning the flames. If I were the devil, I would encourage schools to refine young intellects, but neglect to discipline emotions, just let those run wild. Until before you knew it, you'd have to have drug-sniffing dogs and metal detectors at every schoolhouse door. Within a decade, I'd have prisons overflowing. I'd have judges promoting pornography. Soon I could evict God from the courthouse, then from the schoolhouse, and then from the houses of Congress. And in his own churches I would substitute psychology for religion and deify science. I would lure priests and pastors into misusing boys and girls and church money. If I were the devil, I'd make the symbol of Easter an egg and the symbol of Christmas a bottle. If I were the devil, I'd take from those who have and give to those who wanted until I had killed the incentive of the ambitious. And what'll you bet? I couldn't get whole states to promote gambling as the way to get rich. I would caution against extremes in hard work, in patriotism, in moral conduct. I would convince the young that marriage is old-fashioned, that swinging is more fun, that what you see on TV is the way to be. And thus I could undress you in public, and I could lure you into bed with diseases for which there is no cure. In other words, if I were the devil, I'd just keep right on doing what he's doing.
Keep right on doing what indeed he is doing. I personally am a child of the 1960s. I was born at the beginning of that decade, or near the beginning of that decade. So when I hear this, I see a number of things going on, and looking at where this nation is, the world, for example, for that matter, more than 5 decades later, we've done away with restraint. If people practiced some of the basic restraint that I was accustomed to seeing when I was much younger, would there be a Me Too movement? I don't think so. Does it mean that men would not necessarily take advantage of situations and take advantage of females? No, it doesn't mean that. But would it be at the level that we are seeing or having it presented to us? Well, quite frankly, it wasn't. Because there were some personal restraints. It wasn't always put upon or imposed from without. There was simply a sense of right and wrong that was internal. But when you tell people, which we have done, and particularly in the black community, in my lifetime, that we tell people that there is no truth, because once you say that the Bible is true, you don't have anything to replace it. You're simply saying there is no truth. And when there is no truth, there is no value in the human creature. That is why you see generations of people, particularly here in the United States, and particularly among the black population in the United States, where there is very little thought of the sanctity of life. Highest rate of abortion. Little thought for the importance of family. Highest rate of illegitimacy. There's a willingness to give ourselves over to pleasures, even the self-destructive ones. And everything becomes a pursuit just to make people feel better, but never to make them better, to disrupt them, to distance them from any type of ethical or moral mooring, so that they just drift among their own feelings and desires. There used to be a media which, while it did not necessarily moralize, it would call you to attention to make decisions based on what was moral. You heard the clip of the 1972 piece with Mike Wallace from 60 Minutes. He did not moralize, he simply presented the facts of the situation, but it challenged you to make a moral decision. Whether or not your decision was actually moral or was immoral, you were put in front of a set of facts and reports that did not leave you neutral. You had to choose. Now the media has taken that choice away and has decided that everything that is knowingly immoral should be promoted. And that's what they do promote. They don't challenge you to think, they try to tell you what to think. We have abandoned children in almost every conceivable way. We don't think children should be part of families. We think children should just happen, and if someone decides to try to raise them, that's fine. If they escape the womb because, oh, well, I made a mistake. Children have become a mistake. Children have become and almost an error in judgment is being pregnant. Because we want to promote sex for something other than what its primary design was. Don't get me wrong, sex is a wonderful thing and extremely enjoyable, but the primary purpose of sex is to bring more people into the world. And when you have the practice of bringing people into the world after procreation has occurred, or the act of procreation has occurred, when you make bringing those people into the world optional, you make people optional. If you think that has no effect, then look how cheap life has become in the minds of young people. And not just other lives, their own lives. They don't see value in themselves because a lot of children have concluded that the only reason they're here is their mom got knocked up and she just didn't want to have an abortion. But she didn't create a family. In some cases, they were used as meal tickets. Not valued except for what they could bring to the group from the government. Money. No concept that fatherhood was desirable, needful, beneficial. Because at the end of the day, it is not women who put check on the emotions of children. That's what fathers do. They take that energy and they redirect it. Just like the farmer versus the soil. The soil always seeks to nourish the plant. It doesn't seek to restrict it. It's the father who comes by. It's the farmer who comes by and sees a tree that has many branches but is not bearing a lot of fruit. And he does the painstaking work and painful work of cutting away that which looks pretty so that we can get from the plant what it is supposed to produce. It is fathers who go in and shut down silly emotions to try to direct children and get them to direct their energy into something productive. We don't have that in the same way anymore. To say that it's sad is an understatement. It is hurtful. And the things that children will do now, they smoke, they drink, they use substances, they use each other, they use weapons, and they have no concept that this is wrong. There is no adult supervision. We allow them to think, we tell them about not the truth, but that they have to find and live their own truths. We promote things that are against nature. We promote things that are against morality. We promote things that are simply against one's own self-preservation. We sit by while people make terrible decisions for themselves that also impact others. We've taken something, and this for me is one of the most ridiculous things that I can imagine in society, because when I was very young, we didn't have the same amount of money in sports. It's not that you couldn't make a living playing sports, but you still had to do something else. You still had to be a contributor to society in order to live well. But we have so perverted sports, and I've said this on several other occasions, the purpose of organized sports in this country and in others is to teach young men how to deal with adversity and to work with each other for meaningful accomplishments. Sports is not intended to be something you're doing when you're 30 years old, when you're 35 years old, when you're 40 years old. The lessons are to be learned by men when they're young and then taken off the field of play and put into the field of work achievement, of social and societal and cultural benefit. You play sports so you can learn how to build something when time for playing with a ball is over. Now we just tell people that all you ever have to do is play with a ball, and therefore you take some of your most talented young men and never get anything productive out of them. You know what else is funny? You know what else is bad about this? The sports that seem to be the most popular have now seen us gravitate to the most freakishly large individuals. So we've taken those who are quote-unquote ordinary young men and have told them, since they can't play at the highest level, that they have no business even staying in sports at all. If you're not Kevin Durant, who's 6'11", can play with a ball but can't seem to accomplish anything else, he doesn't seem to have any real emotional maturity, he doesn't seem to have any real drive aside from playing with a ball, what is he going to accomplish? I have no idea. But that is what we have people aspiring to. We have people looking to play games and therefore make their money, make their fortunes, and hide from the rest of society. They seek celebrity instead of accomplishment. And for the rest, we remove ambition. The whole thing with progressivism is to make everybody equal, which is not possible. And the only thing it does is reward those who will not work and punish those who would work to the point where they see no point in putting forth a strong effort. This is a terrible thing. All of this because at the beginning, and for me the beginning would have been the sexual revolution. At the beginning, no one said the removal of these restraints was wrong. No one was willing to tell women that altering their bodies chemically so that they could not reproduce was of no benefit to society. That opening the door for them to be physically irresponsible with their bodies in the same way that some men had been and continue to be was of no benefit to them and no benefit to the culture. But we didn't take that stand. We didn't restrain women. We didn't try to restrain men anymore. But this is the thing you have to remember about the sexual revolution. Once you took the restraint off of women, there was no reason for the men to ever have any restraint again. Because pregnancy was no longer their issue. If the woman got pregnant, that's on her. Why didn't you take the pill? What do you mean you're pregnant? I don't want to deal with that. And then, of course, you had in 1973, you gave people the right to kill children in the womb without any accountability. So please explain to me, once you allow the sexual revolution to take hold and then quote-unquote legalize abortion, how in the world were you ever going to hold men accountable for anything? And now they're not. They're not accountable for families. They're not needed in families in the minds of the progressives. And you have the devastation of the American family with blacks in the lead. This is horrific, but it keeps happening. As Paul Harvey said, if I were the devil, I would remove restraints. I would tell people that there was no truth and no value in the human creation. I would tell people that there are no values that they should have apart from themselves, not patriotism, not morality, not anything. No value in work. Only seeking pleasure, even if those pleasures are self-destructive. And I would keep a culture around. Just, you know what, there's a media, there's the press, there's the news cycle. That's all it's doing is circulating and recirculating all these things that work to destroy and telling you that it's all right. I would stop trying to get children to think more than they emote and just say, let that go. Let's not teach them to think. Just teach them to be true to themselves, whatever that may mean. Let's get anything regarding a real deity out of society and let ourselves be gods. Let's take the last and most important vestige of humanity, and that is the ambition to produce, and water it down through income and wealth redistribution to the point where you have fewer people who even see the value in working, and make everything about celebrity. This is the culture that we've created. It's terrible. But it is also ours. America in 2016 took a lateral step and did not continue directly down that path by not electing Hillary Clinton. It's not about electing Donald Trump. It's about not electing Hillary Clinton. But the forces of darkness, and I'll be very honest, didn't take that well. And in 2018, they resurfaced with some very interesting election practices. And they're going to do that again. So the challenge is to you, if you want to be a great nation, you're going to have to restore some things that you put aside. And you're going to have to take the consequences of telling yourself when it's appropriate that you're wrong. Telling yourself that there are things you shouldn't do. And telling yourself that it's okay to hold other people accountable no matter what you need to do to show them the error of their ways. And that's our show. God bless you. God keep you. I don't want to always moralize, but every so often you have to talk about things that matter. Otherwise, you are part of the problem. Until next week, do take care.
Listening to Black Man Thinkin' with your host, Stan Levy. Join Stan midnight to 2 a.m. That's late Monday night into early Tuesday morning. And find him on the web at Black Man Thinkin' without the G. That's blackmanthinkin.com.